it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Bloom and Grow, Strawberry Jam, Pig Out, and Word Buddies Woodland. So I have stamped all the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers to match this pattern paper from Simple Stories called Boho Baby. So I'm flipping through and finding the print that I want to use as my inspiration for the color palette. And I'm going to tuck that under my cardstock panel. I also want to alter my little jam jar and turn that into a honey pot. So I have masked off the word jam, and then I'm just drawing some lines with a pencil to create some drip marks, and then tracing over that with the Memento Tuxedo Black marker. And then I'm not going to be using the other jam jar and also one of the strawberries that didn't stamp neatly. So I'm going to jump into my Copic coloring, and I'm going to start with the bears. For those, I decided to go with some E20s. These are very rich browns that really tie well into the kind of brownish, rusty colored flowers in that pattern paper. So I'm using E21, E23, E25, and E27. I started with the E27. For this little bear, I'm shading him with the shadows equal on the right and the left because he's facing completely forward. So I started with that E27, like I said, to lay in the shadows, blended those out with the E25, and now I'm coming in with the E23, and I'm going to fill in most of him with that. I'm going to leave the little muzzle to be lighter. I'm also going to leave some space on the belly and the bottom of the feet for the lightest shade. So I'm just bringing that E23 down, and then I'll come in with that E21. I'll fill in the centers of the ears, the muzzle, like I said, pull that color down on the belly, and then fill in the bottom of the feet, just for a little extra contrast. I really want these to look like little teddy bears because I want to do a teddy bear picnic card. For this second little bear, I'm going to use the same colors, but the shading is going to be slightly different. He's tilted just a little bit toward the left, so the shadows will be heavier on the right-hand side, with just a little bit on the left to give that roundness. And then I'm going to continue coloring with the next shade down, which is the E25. Again, just pulling a little bit more of that color forward on the right hand side, and definitely making sure to leave some room though for that E23, and then again leaving the centers of the ears and the muzzle and the bottom of the feet and the belly for that lightest shade, the E21. So just pulling that color down, making sure to grab the edge of the previous shade and pull it into the next one so I get a nice smooth blend, and then finishing off with that highlight like I said. And I did get just a little bit of color outside the lines on his back, so I'm going to grab my zero marker, the Colorless Blender, and just push that color back over the edge of that line. I also wanted to use these shades for the loaf of bread, but I'm skipping the E27 for this so that it's a little bit lighter, and adding a shadow in the little curve of that loaf, and using the E25 for that, blending out with the E23, and then I'll use the E21 for the highlight. So I'm putting a little highlight down at the bottom edge of the bread beneath that shadow, and then also on the top curve of the bread, and also doing the crusts of the two slices. Then I'll use the E50 to give the bread itself, like the center of the bread, a little bit of color as well. Then I'm going to switch up my brown combo to the E30s to do the picnic basket. So I chose E33, E35, and E37. I'm using the E37 at either end and also at the base of the handle and at the crease where the two flaps on the top meet. Then I'll blend that out with the E35, just pulling that color toward the center on the bottom and then toward the edges for the flaps. And then using that E33 to fill the rest of that in. And I'm also going to color the inside of the basket carefully around that little napkin that's hanging out, so it's a little bit darker inside. For the blanket, I'm using E40 and E41, starting with that E41 on the outside edges and pulling that color toward the center with the E40 and then fading off to white cardstock. I wanted it to look like one of those natural fiber woven blankets, so I just wanted like a light beige tone. So I did 2 layers of that. And I am going to add a pattern to that later on, but I wanted to let it dry first. So I'm moving on to my honey pot, and I'm doing that with B41 and B45. So it's a little bit hard to see, but there is a kind of darker cornflower blue flower in that pattern paper. You can kind of see like half of it down at the very bottom left corner of that paper. This is just a slightly darker version of that. So I used B41 and B45 for that honey pot, and then I'm also going to do the bread plate and the mug to match as if they're all part of a set. So I'm going to do the rim of the bread plate with the B45 on the back part where it would be in more shadow, and then also the shadows of the mug. And then I'm going to blend that out with the B41, and all of those areas are super small that just the 2 shades was plenty. And I'll also fill in the front part of that plate rim. Then I'm going to keep the B41 and add in the B52, and I'm going to color in some of these little flowers that are going to go in the background of my scene. I just wanted to have little touches of flowers to represent the flowers in that pattern paper. So I started with the B52 for those, and then I'm actually going to blend them out with the B quadruple 0 because I didn't want them to be too dark. And I did go in with 2 layers on those just to beef up that saturation a bit, putting that color closest to the stem. And then I'm going to jump into my pattern on the blanket. And originally I had planned to do a plaid, so I was starting with my lines, but then I kind of liked the idea of having the 2 wide stripes at either end. So I decided to try to fill that in and see if I liked the way that looked. So I drew the lines in with the B52, and then I'm blending that out with the B quadruple 0. And I can see that I do like it, so I'm going to come in with more of that B52 and do a bit more shading, just pulling that color toward the center of each of those stripes. And then I'll blend that out with the B quadruple 0 again. I love doing these blankets because it gives you a pretty big canvas to try some different patterns and just experiment, and you don't have to worry too much about how it turns out because a lot of it is going to get covered up with all the little picnic images, you know, later on. So now I'm coming in with that B41 and just reinforcing the edges of that line, making them look a little bit stronger, and then filling in the center of the plate with the B quadruple 0. For the honey, I'm going to use Y21 and Y26. So I did a little Y26 at the bottom of all of those drips and also filled in the centers of the flowers that have them. I'm going to do the yellow parts of the B as well, and then blend that out with the Y21. And then for the black parts of the B, I decided to go with some cool grays. There's no black in that pattern paper, so I wanted to go with something a little bit softer to kind of keep in tone with that pattern paper. And then I'm also going to do the knife with those shades as well, C3 and C5. And then I went back to my B quad for the bee's wings. For the strawberries, I'm going to go with some pale pinks also to match that pattern paper. So I'm using R000, R11, and R20. And I'm shading 2 on the right and 1 on the left just so I can turn them on different ways on the blanket later on. So I started with the R20, blended up with the R11, and then finished with the R000, and I did do 2 layers of those shades as well. And then I'm also going to do the remaining flowers. So I picked 3 to do with R20, blended out with R11. And then the other 3 I'm going to do R11 and blend that out with R000, just so there's a little bit of variety there. And I'll also do the napkin that's hanging out of the picnic basket with those shades, just putting the darkest on the inside with the highlight on the outside edge that's hanging out into the sun. And then I'm going to go with E31 and E33 for that spoon in the jam jar. I wanted it to look like one of those wooden honey sticks. And then for the leaves of my flowers, I wanted something olive toned because that's what the leaves are on that pattern paper. So I chose YG93 and YG95. So I'm just doing a little bit of YG95 and then also doing the tops of the strawberries with that YG95. And then I'll add a touch of that YG93 to the leaves of those flowers. Then I'll take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just get that started so it's flowing nicely. And I'm going to go over the eyes of my teddy bears just to make them nice and bright and shiny again. It really brings them to life, I think, after all of the coloring. And then I'm going to trim all of these images out with their matching dies. So then I'm going to go back to my Simple Stories Boho Baby pattern paper pad and find a contrasting pattern to use with this floral print. And there were a whole bunch in here that would have worked really well. This is a gorgeous paper pad that has a lot of options. So I was going back and forth between this pink with the white hearts and this cornflower blue with the white stars, but I ended up deciding to go with the hearts. I think either one of them would have been gorgeous, but this is what I chose for today. I'm going to die cut both of those using the Hello Bluebird Gallery Frame 2 die. And then I'm going to pop out the insert from those and swap them out. So this actually creates the frame for a second card. So you could absolutely make 2 cards at once if you wanted to. And if you'd like to see me use the other frame in another video, just let me know and I can definitely do that. But I'm going to use the one with the floral on the outside for today. And just to keep these prints together, I'm going to grab some Scotch Magic Tape, just the clear regular tape, and I'm going to tear the strips of it in half and just tape this frame together so that I can use it as one piece. And then I can back it with some foam tape so that I can pop it up on my card and give that frame a little bit more prominence in the scene. So once that frame is taped back together, I'm going to set this aside and work on my background. And to do that, I'm going to grab that Gallery Frame 2 die once again. And I'm going to lay that in place over a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. And then I can watercolor a little background. So I'm going to start with some Stormy Sky Distress Oxide ink. Now this color is a little bit dark for what I wanted, but it had that perfect smoky cornflower blue shade. So I'm going to add a little bit of that in the top right corner, and then I'm going to really water that down for the rest of the scene and just bring that color down. And then towards the bottom, I'm going to start in the bottom right corner, again keeping that color fairly light because I don't want it to get so dark that it looks like a stormy scene. And then I'm grabbing some Bundled Sage Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to add a little bit of grass in the top portion and just kind of let that meld into the stormy sky. Since it's still wet, it's going to blend and give me some nice soft edges there. And then I'm going to just darken up the bottom part a little bit more for a tiny bit more contrast. And then I'm going to let this panel dry for a little bit Once it has, I want to add a little bit of splatter, so I'm switching to a smaller paintbrush and then picking up some of that ink and just tapping it all over the background to give it a bit more interest. And then I'm going to set it aside to dry once again. Then I will pop that panel into my MISTI, and I'm going to grab a sentiment from the Hello Bluebird Typed Everyday stamp set. And I'm using the one that says, "So grateful for you." I'm stamping that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink down at the bottom of my scene. And I also did a little bee trail from Bloom and Grow at the top right corner. I stamped the sentiment down a second time just to make sure it was bold enough that it would really stand up on the card. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using a piece of MFT Princess Pink cardstock for the card base. And I'm stamping in Ballet Slippers ink from Lawn Fawn. I'm using the bear from Bloom and Grow and another sentiment from the Typed Everyday. I did stamp this down a whole bunch of times, especially this sentiment, because I wanted to make sure it stood up enough because this ink dries back a bit. But then I'm ready to assemble my card, so I'm going to peel off the release papers from the foam tape that I added to the back of the frame, and then I'm going to line that up over that background panel and get it exactly where I want it, and then press that down into place. Make sure that's all nice and smoothed down. And then I'll take my liquid glue, my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, and I'm going to add some of that to the back of the panel and then line that up on the front of my card base. And that is a standard A2 size card. So it's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall with a top fold. So I'll just press that down firmly to adhere that, and then I can grab my images to start setting up this scene. I'm going to add the blanket first, just adding that right to the grass, and then very quickly I want to add these 3 groups of flowers because I want to tuck them under the edge of that blanket before that glue dries completely permanent. So I'm going to do the 2 blue ones on either corner of that blanket, and then I'll have the pink flowers in the center. And I know it looks like there's a gap between them right now, but it's going to be filled in with the little teddy bears, so it's not going to look like that once the card is all finished. So I'll take that teddy bear that's turned a little bit to the left and add him over on the right between those 2 groupings of flowers. And then I'll take the teddy bear that's sitting completely forward and add him between the other 2. So it all looks filled in now. Then I'm just going to accessorize this sweet little picnic scene with the honey pot between them. And I dropped that, but thankfully it landed glue side up, so it didn't get any glue where it didn't need to be. So I'm going to make sure that that is nice and straight. And then I'm going to add the loaf of bread a little bit in front of that. Just a little bit hanging off the edge of that blanket just to expand that scene out a bit. And then I'll take that picnic basket, and that's going to go in the bottom left corner of that little window. Then I added the bread plate, although I am going to have to adjust that in just a bit. And the little mug is going to go over on the right hand side. And then I have these little berries, so I'm going to just add a little spot of glue to the card and then set the berry down in the glue. I find that's nice and easy, although it's not difficult to add them by adding the glue directly on the back either, as you can see there. So I put 1 berry near the coffee mug, and then the other 2 I wanted to go near the honey pot. So that bread plate ended up being a little bit in the way, so I am going to just remove that and work with my berries first since they're a little bit further back in the scene. And then I can add that bread plate once again once I have it kind of figured out where I want it to go. So those little berries are super tiny and fiddly, but I think they're so adorable and they just add so much to the scene. Then I'll take the knife and I'm going to add that to the bread plate, just kind of hanging over the edge. And then finally I have the little bee, which is going to go up in the sky at the end of that bee trail. Super cute. I love that tiny bee. So now I want to work on the rest of my sentiment, and I die cut the word thanks, which comes with the Gallery Frame 2 die, but I want to make that stand out a bit more. I die cut it out of some Lawn Fawn Moonstone cardstock, and now I'm adding kind of an ombre look to it using B45 down at the bottom, and then I'm going to blend that up with B41. Just going right over that, and I kept the little bits that were in the letters because I felt like it was easy to just color right over that without them getting too bent out of shape. And then finally I'll come in with that B00 and bring that up as well. And then I'll grab my little pokey tool that Tonic Studios, I can never remember what that thing is actually called, but I think a lot of people know it as the pokey tool. I don't know who coined that phrase, but somebody did. It wasn't me. But anyway, I'm going to poke out all the little bits between the letters so that we have that word thanks. And then I'm going to add that to the bottom window using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue because it has that super fine nozzle so it can really get behind that very delicate die cut. And I quickly realized it was too difficult to hold on to with my fingers, so I grabbed my EK Success reverse tweezers to hang on to that. And that keeps my fingers out of the glue while I add that to the back. And then it also helps me position that on the card so I can see exactly where that is going to go and get that spaced correctly before I press that down. So I wanted to make sure that the end of the T and the end of the S were the same distance apart, and then also the tops of the H and K were the same distance as the bottom letters from the frame to the bottom sentiment. So to finish off this card, I'm adding a little bit of honey onto my bread, going back to my Y26 and Y21. And I also wanted to add some rosy cheeks to my bears, so I used R22 to lay in a little oval, and then I'm going to trace around the edge of that with the R20 to help soften that into the fur, and I even gave the bee a little rosy cheek with that R20. Then I'll take a clear Sakura Jelly Roll pen and I'm going to use that over my honey, both the drip that's coming out of the pot and the honey that is on the center of the bread, just to give that a little bit of a shine. And I did put it on the bee's wings as well. And I also added a bit of sparkle using my favorite Stardust Stickles. So I did that to the blue flower petals and then the centers of the pink flowers. I did a tiny touch on the strawberries and then just a little bit at the very bottom of the letters of the word thanks. So that is going to finish things up. So I will lift that up to the camera, tilt that into the light so you can see that shine and sparkle. And I'll give you another peek at the inside as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I absolutely love how this card turned out. I've been wanting to do a teddy bear picnic card for a really long time. I'm so glad I finally got the chance to do it. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you're always alerted when I post a new video, which is every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have everything linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.